very interesting game. Armandas is a very strong, I think he's like mid-1500s. He's very strong, he's improving quickly. And his opponent, Munir Jemaa, is actually over 2100. And white won this game, so very impressive
so an
result.
upset. It's nice to see an upset. Soren, can you please not touch that? Okay, so it starts with the Sicilian Najdorf. Always an interesting opening to see. Bishop e3, one of the sharper moves, although here after e5, white goes knight f3, which is a bit of a more quiet line. Transposes more into sort of classical setups where a lot of the battle revolves around the d5 square. If you play instead knight to b3, there's a ton of theory there and a lot of games a lot of sharp games still happening today. But knight f3 is a popular move also, and there's nothing wrong with it. Bishop e7, a3. So a3, I haven't seen this one too often. I see the idea. The idea is that if white puts his bishop on c4, the bishop actually has a nice little square on a2 that can go back to. I can't say, I don't know too much about it. I know when you play bishop c4, often black will counter with bishop e6 and try to trade that bishop. And I'm wondering whether a3 will be that useful in that scenario, but it's possible. And note that white doesn't really mind black playing knight g4 because it surrenders control of the d5 square. And sometimes with the knight on f3, one of the plans is actually to bring it to d5, which is sort of a long journey. You go like to d2, then to f1, and then somehow to e3 and get to this square. But a lot of the battle in this line tends to revolve around the square. So we'll see if that's what ends up being the key factor in this game. So castles, bishop c4, knight to d7. So I'm curious whether the move bishop e6, immediately trying to fight for that square, might have made sense here. It could have been that it was a more solid move. Knight d7, I'm wondering what the plan is going to be, because coming to c5 is not really possible because white will just take it and will be happy to get rid of that knight and continue the fight for the square and maybe even win a pawn. So let's see. So castles.
I think that perhaps because of the rating difference, I think it's possible that Jemaa here was envisioning a tactic against Armandas, possibly with a line like this, like let's say castles, castles, knight b6, and let's just any move from white. We have ideas like this sort of looming. Right.
Well, I mean, with the knight on b6, the bishop would be attacked, so he might just move it right. He would probably move it right away, but he might be envisioning. I mean, the knight on d7 is not bad. He could play b6 and bishop b7. Let's see how he plays it. So he goes queen c7, which attacks the bishop. Now, I would have expected white to play bishop a2 just because that seems to be one of the benefits of having played a3. I mean, a3 could be useful against b5, b4, but I would have expected the bishop to go back to a2, or even to play maybe queen to e2 to kind of free the square for the rook. But he plays bishop b3, which seems to be a little bit inaccurate to me, because if the knight ever comes to c5, black will attack the bishop, which is a bit more annoying. So, but he plays b5. I would have been tempted to play knight c5, and then white might have to take that. But after queen takes, black has the bishop pair, and I think black is probably doing quite well here. Normal position, like white would play rook e1 and knight d5, and white's not going to be worse. Or could play rook e1, knight d2, knight f1, knight e3, like we talked about. It's still very much a game, but I think I might have liked that better. I feel like black is kind of confusing a few different ideas together. White plays bishop to d5. Reasonable, but that bishop will end up being a target. So I like that black played rook b8.
So why not just taking that bishop? The knight comes into d5, and then you play the other knight back to f6.
So right now the queen is attacked, so he would have to first play here, which wastes a little bit of time. It still is possible, but one issue here is that knight f6 is not so easy to play, maybe because we'll have either knight b6 or bishop b6. It's possible. This is still playable because I don't think white's...
When I suggested, I just neglected that the queen was hit. So I agree.
No, rook b8 makes sense. So he plays queen to d3. Black plays knight c5. Seems reasonable. Bishop takes, queen takes, also reasonable. And the bishop goes back to b3. So we have this is going to be, again, a battle over that square. I feel like black is not too badly positioned here, though. And he could maybe play bishop e6. He played... Well, bishop e6, I guess maybe he was afraid that the pawn at e6 could be a bit of a problem after knight g5. Whoops, sorry, having some mouse issues here. Knight g5, and maybe the pawn is hard to defend. If queen c8, we could play queen to h3 and attack it again, and that's a bit annoying actually. So okay, so bishop e6 maybe is not so good. So he plays bishop b7, which, okay, is reasonable in that he's trying to control that square. The problem is that white is quickly going to get a lot of pieces here. He played rook fe1. I actually would have liked putting, I'm not sure which rook, but I feel like I would have liked to put a rook on d1 to kind of cement this d5 square. Either rook, maybe the a1 to keep f2 protected. The one idea of putting the other rook is that it frees a square for our long night journey that we've been talking about.
So why would you want to use the kingside rook for d1? Because it seems like, rook a d1, rook fe1 seems like a good setup.
Well, rook fe1 I'm not sure does too much. It's it's a bit of a nicer square than f1, but it's just protecting the e4 pawn, and I'm not sure that pawn really needs protection. But the main reason for the f rook would be if we wanted to bring that knight to that square, as it's really the only path to the d5 square. And but of course it becomes sort of a question of timing, because black might play rook d8, and then maybe on knight d2, black would love to somehow free themselves and open up the position for their bishop. So rook fe1 I'm not too in love with, because the e4 pawn is not attacked, so it's not clear to me that the move in the game really does too much. Rook c8, rook d1. But the thing is, white's position is very solid, right? It's quite difficult for black to do too much. H6. One thing that I think at some point black has to try to do something, and I'm wondering whether it was time to maybe start playing a5 with the idea of either playing a4 and b4 or just b4 right away and try to force white's hand a little bit.
Well, at this time a4 is undefended, right? Yeah, you can't do it right now.
Yeah, and if white tries to take the b pawn, then the e pawn will be hanging, and we have complications. So that seems interesting to me. He played h6, and white plays knight h4, which is often a counter to h6, and that's for Armandas, who's a 1500 player. This is a very good move to spot, because normally if you play the knight to h4, black will play g6, but here g6 is not possible. If you notice the pin that the bishop has on the king, and white would be able to play knight takes g6 and win a key pawn and have a big advantage. So knight h4 is a good move, threatening to play knight f5.
In this position.
Yeah. So actually, I do see that tactics start to happen now.
Yeah, I guess knight e4 isn't in time though, because maybe just knight g6 anyway. You're hitting an undefended bishop. You're hitting a rook.
Well, knight e4 actually you can just take, because he doesn't have time to take the knight on h4 because the queen is attacked. So he doesn't.
Yeah, go with this queen.
Yeah.
Not being careful.
But knight g4 is maybe what he was counting on, because Soren. Okay, Soren, please stop. Okay. So knight g4 is a move that definitely is interesting, because it attacks the pawn on f2 and the knight on h4. So there's a bit of a double attack, and so. But white plays knight f5, and so now the game gets certainly a bit complicated. This is one of these situations where if you say A, you kind of got to say B. So black has to try to take something here, and he takes the pawn on f2 with the queen, king h1. Now his bishop's still under attack with check, so he's got to do something, and he moves it here. And so what is this position? It gets complicated. The problem is that. Yeah, I actually see that black has real problems here, because the knight on f5 is really strong. It prevents the queen from coming back to h4. And so here, when white plays rook f1, the queen has to go back sort of far away. So it goes back to b6. And yeah, now Armandas has to move queen g3. And actually now the position looks really bad for black. Suddenly, he's got a lot of problems, right? The pawn on d6 is under attack from the rook. It's possible that the queen on b6, by the way, is not the best square. Maybe you could have tried to put it on a7. Just so that it wouldn't fall prey to rook takes d6 as an attack. But here he's got real problems, because this knight doesn't have good squares, right? It could maybe try to play h5 is the only move that I could think of that would be a little bit different.
Rook takes d6 is going to hit when the queen moves. You can even maybe even try h3, rook takes f6
Actually,
ideas.
Rook take d6 is very strong. One of the key reasons though is that after rook c6, because if the queen moves, then there's all kinds of issues. But now knight d5 is really strong.
I know something that.
What do you think, Soren?
Knight could do. It can go on top of the
bishop.
Yeah, it can go on the top of the bishop and then it can.
If knight takes f6, knight takes f6, queen takes g7 would be mate.
So Soren is still learning chess, and so this would be very strong. Okay, so in the game he played rook takes c3, which I don't know if it's gonna. It's a thematic move to sort of sacrifice this, but I'm not sure that here it's gonna. Yeah, here it's not gonna work because he's still dealing with all of the same threats and doesn't really have a solution. So black played d5 and queen takes g4, and now white is up a full rook, maybe for a pawn or two, but really nothing enough. The rest of the game we'll just kind of scroll through the moves quickly because I don't think there's much more. But this was a really nice. I think the turning point was really this knight f5 move a few moves ago, which sort of invited black to take on f2, and then so after that the game was pretty much over. So really a nice game and a big upset.
Do you think Armandas saw that this all was happening? Knight f5, he's baiting black to take f2.
I have no idea. It's possible that after knight h4, it's the kind of situation where I might be 50-50 on whether after knight h4, knight g4, if he saw knight g4, saw knight f5, and saw that it was just going to be really good for him, or whether he got a little bit lucky. Although he had played very well and well above I think his rating level. So good game, and again we were here. We can just go through the last few moves, but in this case, up a rook, it's hard to imagine that there's going to be anything that really black could have improved upon at this point. Oops. Sorry.
Yeah, if you hit the up and down keys by accident, it freaks out.
Yeah. Yeah. So eventually, of course, when you're up a rook, you have a lot of margin for error. But here the game ends with a nice checkmate. So nice game by Armandas, and impressive. It's rare. It's rare you see a 600 point or something like that, 500, 600 point upset. So yeah.